The first one is understand deeply. In particular, understand simple things deeply. As a teacher, I've noticed that people often have a superficial understanding of things that are very basic to any subject that they're learning. Of course, I'm from the Department of Mathematics, so I see this in mathematics, in the mathematical understanding of my students. Very often they are vague or unclear about the basics that they were introduced to in maybe elementary school or high school. But I want to tell you a story that illustrates the concept of understanding simple things deeply and the power that it has. And this is a story that has nothing to do with mathematics. In fact, it has to do with a friend of mine who is an international virtuoso in trumpet. He's a famous trumpet player, and he lives in Germany. Well, he was invited a few years ago to come here to the University of Texas at Austin to give a master class in trumpet performance. The University of Texas at Austin has one of the greatest music schools in the country. It's wonderful. And so the graduate students in this program who are studying trumpet performance are excellent students. Well, my friend, his name is Tony Plogue. He was invited to give this master class, and he was staying at my house, came over from Germany, and he's staying at my house, and he said, would you like to come and listen to this master class? Well, I had never been to a master class. I didn't know what a master class even meant. So I said, yes, I'd love to come to your class. So we went down to his class, and the way it worked was this. There were about 20 people in the audience, and these were all members of the trumpet faculty or students of the trumpet. And then he was introduced, and they all thought that he was really wonderful because he is a famous trumpet player, and they thought he was great. It was as though Tiger Woods had come to give a putting lesson or something like that. So they thought this was wonderful. And so he was introduced, and then after there was an piano there with an accompanist, and after he was introduced, he said, who is the first student? And it was a person, let's say Bob. Bob came down to the front, and my friend Tony, the international virtuoso, said, what are you going to play for us today, Bob? And Bob said, well, I will play the third movement of the Rachmaninoff, some fancy piece, and proceeded to play wonderful music. Very fancy music, high, fast notes. And of course, he was a wonderful, wonderful musician. This was a person who will make his living as a trumpet player. And really was excellent. Well, my friend Tony then, after a few minutes, said, oh, very good, and then proceeded to give advice. And he said, well, if you stand in such and such a way, or you push your lips in this way, and you explode with your stomach in this way, and if you think about the music in this way, he gave all the things, the kinds of advice that you might expect from this real professional to this wonderful student. And Bob practiced, did things that he was told. And then my friend Tony said, how much time do you spend practicing the exercises? Apparently, every trumpet player plays some basic exercises. And he said, well, I spend 5 minutes to warm up, and then I practice. And he practices several hours a day, by the way. And my friend Tony said, well, you might spend more time on the exercises. He didn't make a big deal of it. He just said that. And Bob said, okay, I'll do that. And he sat down. Next came the next player, let's say Anne. So Anne comes up, same thing happens. She plays virtuosic stuff. Tony gives advice. And then at the end of the treatment, he says, how much time do you spend on the basic exercises? And she said, I spend 5 minutes and then warm up. And he said, oh, you might spend more time on the exercises. Well, this happened 4 times. There were 4 students who were treated in this manner, took about 2 hours. And at the end of that time, he had told each one of them, you might spend more time on the exercises. At the end of that time, everybody was finished, and he said, are there any questions? Well, I always have questions. In fact, it's one of the elements of effective thinking, to have questions. So I raised my hand. I was the only one in the room who was not a trumpet player. I raised my hand, and he said, Mike, what is your question? And I said, why did you keep telling these wonderful players to practice the exercises more? And he said, oh, well, let me show you. And he said, Bob, would you come back down again? So this was the first student. Bob, would you come back down again? And Bob said, sure. Bob comes down, and he says, Bob, would you play this exercise for us? And Bob said, sure. And Bob goes ahead and plays this exercise. Da, 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 da. Some very childish sounding music. And we had only heard this virtuosic stuff beforehand, and this was just a childish little piece. And Tony nodded, and he said, Bob, could I borrow your trumpet? And I was thinking to myself, Tony, you're giving a trumpet lesson, bring a trumpet. But apparently he hadn't thought of that. So he borrowed Bob's trumpet, but he did have a mouthpiece of his own, put it in the trumpet, and proceeded to play that little exercise. He hadn't played anything himself before, but he played that little exercise. And when he played it, it was gorgeous. Every note rang like a bell. The phrasing made it a beautiful thing to listen to. You could listen to it all day. Da, 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 da. Just gorgeous. And at that moment, it was completely clear that the difference between this real international virtuoso and these wonderful students, the difference occurred at the most basic possible level. And Tony, my friend Tony Plogue, explained it right then. He said, look, if you can become so efficient at producing these exercises, if you can control the sound with such precision and nuance so well, then when you play these extremely difficult passages, you can take that mastery of the basics and apply them to the most advanced work you know, and it will make it better. So it is not the lesson here is not that you should only only work on the basics. It would be impossible to master the basics at the level that this international virtuoso could play them until you have learned more advanced things. But then going back, retreating back to the basics and relearning them and learning them with more nuance shows their relationship to the advanced work. So this was an example of understanding simple things deeply that really made a difference in the ability of a person to perform at the highest levels of their skill. And this practice is one of the habits that you can personally apply to every aspect of your life. And certainly it applies to the learning of mathematics. As you become more advanced in mathematics, you can look back at basics and see those basics as a much richer kind of domain. You see ideas such as numbers, which we will treat in this course, but you'll see them with much richer nuance. And then they inform your understanding of them at a deeper level. Well, this is an illustration of the first element of effective thinking, which is understand deeply. In particular, understand simple things deeply. It's a practice that you can apply in your own life.